Hi. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Hello. My name is Grace. This is the Recon, the Redress Conversation. I'm one of the digital organizers here at the Redress Movement. And this is my bi-weekly live stream where I talk about various different things relating to organizing, related to housing justice, racial justice, all kinds of things like that. If you're interested in keeping up with what the Redress Movement is doing, I have all of our social medias over here. So you can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn. Over here is our email, hello@redressmovement.org. If you're interested in getting involved in the work that we're doing, you can shoot us an email there. We'd love to get you involved in what's going on. I do these live streams every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're watching it in real time, thank you for being here. If you're watching it after the fact on our YouTube channel, I appreciate you too. Anyway, we're going to get into today's topic in just a moment. What we're going to be talking about today is actually, I'm going to be walking you through a resource that is available on our website, and I feel like those who, if you know, you know. If you're familiar with them, or if you're from one of our three national cities, you're familiar with these resources. And if you're not from one of these three cities, you may not know these are here. And I think they're a really interesting resource that our research team has put together, some original research that shows a little bit about the three cities that we're currently in, which, if you don't know, are Denver, Colorado, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Charlotte, North Carolina. South Carolina. Ooh, Grace. Ooh, ooh, it is. Ooh, it is. This is how you know it. The weather has gotten too nice because I'm slipping. You know when that happens, when it's like it gets warm out one day, and now it's like you can't. Nothing matters. You know what I mean? It's like North Carolina, South Carolina, same place. I'm just not sure why we're being all. Just not sure why we're being all technical about it. So we're going to be talking about the story maps. I'm going to be walking you through them. I think we'll have time to do all three of them because they're not that long, and I'd like to just do them all at one time. So our check-in question of the day, everybody's favorite part of the live stream, check-in question of the day, is I think this is that time of year that starts separating the temperate regions from the survival area regions of this country in terms of weather. So let me know what the weather's like where you are right now. Has spring sprung, or are we still very much in an Arctic tundra where you are? I know for me, I'm in Washington, D.C., and we had a nice day today. It was like 75 degrees. It was like sunny. It's supposed to be raining right now, but it is not raining right now. So I'm like, boo. I was like, oh, I gotta like go get homes because it's gonna rain soon. Just didn't rain. Still very much sunny. I'm seeing in real time a comment in the chat. Very exciting things. I'm seeing rainy as hell. Boy, word. I love to see it. I love it. I like a rainy day. I don't know about y'all. I enjoy a good rainy day. I find I'm very productive on rainy days. It's almost like I don't feel like, oh, I should get outside. I should get fresh air. I should go somewhere, do something. It's kind of like I'm not going fucking anywhere. I'm staying right here. I'm going to sleep, Well, not going to sleep, but I feel like I get those, like, like the lo-fi girl on YouTube. That's what I feel like on a rainy day. And maybe that's why I'm so productive, because I just have that seared in my memory. I'm seeing some agreement with that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. GIF reactions here making me laugh. Okay. I'm going to keep it together. So with that being said, let's get into the first one. And we're going to start with Milwaukee. Why? No reason. I just wanted to start with Milwaukee. So yeah, without further ado, this is the story of segregation in Milwaukee. So the Milwaukee metro area has been consistently ranked one of the most segregated metro areas in the country for decades. Intentional practices by homeowners, developers, banks, and government agencies created the segregated spaces we see today in Milwaukee. I'm going to pause here. See, this is the problem. I'm going to be saying too many things as we go along. I think it's really important here. This is something really important that we focus a lot on. Homeowners, developers, banks, and government agencies. I only highlight this to say, like, look at how many actors involved we have just listed here in how Milwaukee has ended up the way it is today. And this is true nationwide. This isn't just for Milwaukee. I think that's really important to point out, because I think sometimes we get a little like lost in like, oh, in kind of these myths around segregation, and like, oh, it was just private actors and you can just sue them and then restore it, or like even it was just like it's just now the government's job to restore it, where there's a lot of local work that needs to happen too for restorative justice. So anyway, I'll keep it trucking, but because we're 2 sentences and I can't be going on a tangent yet. Policies and practices by these entities created a two-tier system of home ownership that granted advantages to white families while keeping people of color from gaining access to home ownership and the generational wealth that comes along with it. As a result, we have huge disparities in home ownership rates between people of color and whites in Milwaukee. In addition to that, these policies and practices created segregated schools with disparate outcomes, detrimental health impacts, and poorer neighborhoods where black and brown people reside. These disparities have led to burdens that the governments are responsible for redressing. Just 60 years ago, Milwaukee was a city where 91% of residents were white. Whites began to move to the suburbs in large numbers as black and brown populations increased in the 1960s and 70s. Segregation policies have made the suburban communities exceptionally white over time, even after the legal practices became unconstitutional in the late 1960s. Milwaukee has the whitest suburb and exurban communities of any of the highly segregated metro areas in the country. Just over 10% of blacks in the country live outside the city, by far the lowest rate in the country among major cities. The picture here. Milwaukee's early stages. In the early 1900s, Milwaukee was the most foreign-born city in the country, outpacing Chicago and New York with its large European ethnic communities. On the other hand, unlike cities such as New York and Chicago, Milwaukee didn't experience a significant rise in its black population until later in the Great Migration. Less than 9,000 black residents lived in Milwaukee by 1940, but even then, forces of segregation conspired to restrict and control that population's movement. This was a process already decades in the making. The beginnings of segregation in Milwaukee. As early as 1919, city residents and suburbanites in Milwaukee began to write racially restrictive covenants to prevent a growing black population from moving into all-white neighborhoods. George T. Hansen, a real estate developer who built golf courses and subdivisions, wrote a restrictive covenant in South Milwaukee for a subdivision with his name in 1937. It was set to expire on January 1st, 2024, meaning, had it not been made unconstitutional, it would still be in effect. Which is like, how do you get the authority to just write, like, that's over 100 years, a covenant that can last? How do you just get the authority to do that? Anyway, the Washington Highlands subdivision of Wauwatosa? What? Sorry to my Wisconsinites. Wauwatosa? Wauwatosa! Listen, geography was not my strong suit in middle school, okay? Start over. Just cut. Okay, I'm sorry. The Washington Highlands subdivision in Wauwatosa writes the first known racially restrictive covenant to keep blacks out in 1919, saying, "At no time shall the land included in Washington Highlands or any part thereof or any building thereon be purchased, owned, leased, or occupied by any person other than of white race." In Milwaukee County, at least 16 of the 18 suburbs wrote covenants to keep blacks out. These covenants were still being written in Greendale in 1958, 10 years after the U.S. Supreme Court rules they are unenforceable. The bullish nature of neighborhood groups when it came to racially restrictive covenants, even at a time when black people were not extremely present, forecasted Milwaukee's future. The Garden Homes Housing Project was the nation's first ever municipally built housing development. It was built in 1921 on the north side of Milwaukee to house over 90 working class and middle class families in single family and two family homes, in contrast to tenement style housing. The homes were built for white families only. The project would be a precursor to the later planned Greenbelt communities of Greenbelt, MD, Green Hills, Ohio, and Greendale, Wisconsin. Homeowners bought stock in Garden Homes Company and would become owners of the homes in 20 years. Where are we going? Okay. I was like, where is it? De jure segregation. The federal government backs racial segregation in Milwaukee. The map for Milwaukee determined that areas occupied by blacks and Mexicans were places where lenders should avoid giving loans for the purchase of homes and businesses. Certain areas were designated as hazardous because of quote-unquote Negro slum area, and others because of an quote-unquote infiltration of Mexicans. By 1950, most mortgage lenders in Milwaukee were not lending to non-white people at all. Artie and Wilbur Halyard, a black couple who moved to Milwaukee in 1923, opened Columbia Savings and Loan Association in 1924. They were known to be the only lender in the city willing to give mortgage loans to black families for decades. The 369 traditional loans in 1950, shown in the graph below, were more than likely their doing. So that's right here. Urban renewal and its discontents. The Hillside Urban Renewal Project in 1957 destroys the successful black business district on Walnut Street, leveling half of the black-owned businesses in the city. Combined with 14,000 homes lost to freeway construction, the residents in some neighborhoods fought back. Milwaukee resident James Richardson rallied his neighbors to stop the destruction of their neighborhood. By late 1968, he and his neighbors stopped the Urban Renewal Project, which would have leveled their neighborhood, which the city had declared a slum. It was one of the few successful efforts in the city to stop urban renewal. The consequences of racial segregation in present-day Milwaukee. Lackluster homeownership. Milwaukee's black homeownership rate of just 27% is the second lowest in the country, slightly above the 25% rate in Minneapolis. Linnie Mosley, president of the Halyard Park Neighborhood Association, fears rising assessments will push more blacks out of their neighborhoods. The market is just crazy now because people are coming in and buying the homes because they have the money. If a house is selling for $450,000 3 blocks from you, your assessment will go up. And if the assessment goes up, the taxes go up. The most recent 2022 property assessment saw increases of more than 30% in the poorest black neighborhoods in the city, with much lower increases in wealthy white neighborhoods. Gentrification and displacement. In the Walker's Point neighborhood on the south side of Milwaukee, the Latinx community was 2/3 of residents in 1990, but fell to just 44% by 2020. The drop is the largest decrease in Latinx residents in any neighborhood in the city. Doncia Strong-Hill describes the displacement as impacting more than just residents. When you culturally displace or attempt to change things that have happened for generations in the way that people live, that is also gentrification that leads to displacement, she stated. Corporate landlords. Corporate landlords are buying single-family homes, duplexes, and apartment buildings at a record pace in Milwaukee. By April 2021, out-of-state landlords own 14% of all Milwaukee rental homes. They now own 4 times as many homes as they did 20 years ago. Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson said, sometimes they buy these homes sight unseen. Stick a body in there, jack up the rent, and use it as a cash cow. They're disconnected absentee landlords. They really don't care about the fabric of our neighborhood. Segregated and unresourced schools. Schools in the Milwaukee metro area have the highest rate of black-white segregation of any metro area in the United States, despite multiple attempts at integration over decades. White students were only 9.9% of students in the public schools in the city in 2020, even though white residents are 1/3 of the population in Milwaukee. The district is expected to lose even more students moving forward and expected to have just 67,500 next year. About half of parents in the city are now sending their children to alternative schools. Mary Patillo, a product of the first legal effort to integrate Milwaukee area schools, called that effort desegregation without integration. She believes current efforts need to be based on equitable outcomes. The material and spiritual solutions cannot be realized through the co-location of black and white bodies alone, but must include the real stuff of equality. Schools must compensate for inequalities in family resources. The high poverty schools in Milwaukee prevent Metro Milwaukee from being an attractive area for new business. The economy of Metro Milwaukee suffers because of the legacy of racial segregation. Home income and health disparities. Where did I get home? The median household income for black people in Milwaukee County, $36,050, is about half of what their white peers earn, $72,040. This is not surprising considering Wisconsin has the highest gap in household income between blacks and whites of any state. Milwaukee is at the top of many negative health indicators for blacks, outpacing peer cities and leading some to declare Milwaukee to be the worst place to raise a black child in the country. blacks in the city live on average 8 years less than their white peers. Health disparities in the black community, like high infant mortality rate, high cancer rates, higher rates of diabetes and heart disease, among others, continue to put pressure on an overburdened healthcare system in the city. As you can see, the story of segregation in Milwaukee is not just a story of the past, but one of the present. If you're interested in learning more about how this is true of other cities, we're going to get into Charlotte and Denver, and this is the rest of the stuff about us. There are, if you go on our website, there are also, you can click through some of these resources to read more about Milwaukee specifically. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Stop making fun of me for saying Wauwatosa wrong. I never said. I don't read. What's that Arthur meme? Like, this sign can't stop me. I don't know how to read. That's how I feel every time I have to read something out loud. Also, me sitting there trying to read Wauwatosa reminded me of the Vine that's like the girl trying to read who, and she's like, Hua. That was how I felt. Hua? That's how I felt. That's what I think I sounded like, too. Alright, I'm pulling up Denver. I'm getting it up. I'm figuring it out. My laptop's moving slow these days. Boom. Here we go. Okay. Round 2. Let's see if there's any names I embarrassingly mispronounced this time. The story of segregation in Denver. Why? Why no scroll? Okay, hang on. Nobody panic. There we go. The problem of unaffordability in Denver and Colorado in general has jolted lawmakers into action. Unaffordability threatens residents' well-being and hinders their potential to prosper, dampening what has made Denver an attractive destination for many in recent years. For no group of Denverites has this hit harder than for blacks and Hispanic residents. Although their median incomes and home values have markedly surpassed those held by most U.S. black and Hispanic households over the last decade, their advancement remains among the most threatened in Denver by displacement. A 2019 report from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition named Denver the place where Hispanic residents face the most risk of displacement from gentrification. And despite Denver rolling out a pilot program to provide up to $25,000 in down payment assistance to members of redline communities, like the historically black neighborhoods of Whittier and Five Points, it remains unclear if this will have much of an effect on black homeownership in a city where home buyers routinely pay tens of thousands of dollars over the asking price for homes that typically cost around $500,000 or more. By understanding the history of segregation that left residents of color at risk of displacement, we can also begin to understand how segregation produces a landscape of inequality and stifled new housing investment, which primed Denver for its current crisis. We can also see how Denverites of color have fought back against the segregation of the city by race since the 1910s, from the Cosmopolitan Club, organized by Clarence F. Holmes, to combat the KKK and racial terror during the 1930s, to the Park Hill Action Committee that fought blockbusting during the 1960s. Their efforts provided inspiration for the redress we must organize to achieve today. First black residents in Denver, Colorado. According to a report by Urban League researcher Ira D. Reed, the first permanent black settler in Denver arrived in 1860. One of the first major black settlements in Denver was Cherry Creek, where black settlers established a homestead community on flood-prone land during the late 19th century. During the early 1920s, a majority of Denver's black community began to cluster in Five Points and in the nearby neighborhood of Whittier due to an abundance of railroad jobs in Five Points, continual flooding of Cherry Creek, and the clearance of black homes in the former black enclave of lower downtown to make room for a Broadway extension during the early 1920s. Five Points, Whittier was a proud and entrenched community. The dawn of systemic segregation in Denver would keep Five Points, Whittier the black hub of Denver for many decades to come. Early attempts to segregate. In Reed's survey, he noted that legal segregation of the Negro does not exist in Denver. This was not for lack of effort. Though the 1910s, various neighborhoods in the city formed property owners and neighborhood improvement associations, such as the Denver Properties Owners Protective Association and the East Side Taxpayers Association, which together lobbied for Denver to adopt a racial zoning ordinance in 1916. According to a draft of that ordinance circulated by the black-owned newspaper, the Denver Star, the ordinance was designed to preserve, quote-unquote, to preserve peace and order within the city and County of Denver by preventing white persons and colored persons so far as predictable from residing on the same block, end quote. The ordinance would achieve this goal by fining homeowners, tenants, and landlords who broke the law up to $50 per day or over $1,100 per day in 2020 dollars. Yikes. Quote, every real estate dealer who belongs to the real estate exchange knows just what speculating real estate sharks have already taken options on certain East Side properties, the Star declared in a 1917 piece endorsing a ticket of municipal candidates. Don't be fooled or misled. Kill Jim Crowism now, and if you cannot kill, elect your friends. Between local resistance and the Buchanan v. Warley 1917 case that ended racial zoning legality, segregationists would soon have to shift towards other methods of enforcing racial segregation in Denver. There was a growing pattern of bombing and other attacks on black homes and businesses in Denver, which suggests a significant organized campaign to defend racial boundaries to the south and east of 5 Points, and to check black expansion into Whittier. Though the list of these attacks is expansive and could cover pages, here are some of the most notable or important ones according to the local NAACP's archives. On November 15th, 1921, the 2112 Glippin Street home of City Parks employee and local NAACP member Charles E.A. Star Street was bombed. Charles E.A. Star Street was bombed for the second time in 5 months. Ironically, on the eve of that, Star planned to sell the home to a white family after tiring of racial intimidation. The house had been previously bombed on July 7th when occupied by a different black man named Walter Chapman. In 1924, a cross was burned on the lawn of Dr. Clarence F. Holmes, a black dentist with an office in 5 Points, who helped found the local NAACP branch and was organizing at the time to desegregate Denver's theaters. Around the same time, a cross was also burned on the lawn of another black dentist named Thomas Ernest McLean, who soon thereafter relocated to the black section of Whittier from his former home in the white neighborhood of Clayton. On January 15, 1927, the home of Mr. E.E. Carrington at Vine and 23rd Street was then bombed successfully for a second time, after a stick of dynamite had badly damaged the front porch and broke several front windows just 1 month before. In addition to these successful bombings, a third bombing was averted when Carrington managed to toss dynamite thrown from a passing car away from his house, while at another point 3 bullets were fired at his wife and her friend while they were standing on the rear porch. Carrington ultimately decided to sell his home back to white owners. By 1927, the local NAACP branch declared racism in Denver a running riot. White supremacy seeps into Denver's governing structures. Racism was running riot not just because of these bombings, but because of their links to an explosion in Denver's Ku Klux Klan membership and the Klan's rise to power in Colorado. By 1924, KKK numbered some 17,000 members in Denver, and at the state level comprised some 34,000 to 35,000 members. Using the power of these numbers, the KKK built a political machine that exerted significant control over state and local government. Denver Mayor Benjamin Stapleton, elected for the first time in 1923, was one such politician elevated to power by the hate group. During Stapleton's early mayoralty, he appointed Klan members to run the city police on a law and order platform, meaning, in other words, that no hate crimes, cross burnings, or bombings of black homes in Denver would fall under serious investigation. I don't know who that car is, but they drive by like every day. And I'm just like, is it ever necessary to have a car that rumbles that loud? It just like, is it ever, like, I can still hear it. And it's significantly far away at this point. It hit no lights. Like, it hit all green. You know what? It's not. Stapleton did later turn on some members of the hate group. He never fully repudiated the KKK, though he did prosecute some corrupt Klan-affiliated officers. But this would not prevent later Denverites from asking that his name be removed from the city's former Stapleton neighborhood in 2020. Good for them. As he should be removed. 5 Points residents continue their resistance. Remarkably, despite the effort of segregationists on every level, 5 Points Whittier residents found ways to resist the segregation taking hold in their city. In addition to the Denver Star's campaign to quash the 1916 segregation ordinance, through the 1930s, Clarence F. Holmes joined local Jewish, Catholic, Japanese, and other multi-ethnic Denver residents to participate in the Cosmopolitan Club, a group dedicated to combating bigotry by fostering mutual tolerance and understanding. During the 1920s, Dr. Joseph H.P. Westbrook passed as a Klan member in order to deliver information on the group's official activities to local racial justice activists. And in 1927, NAACP officials also organized what the Colorado Statesman considered the largest political gathering in the city's history to protest a proposal to segregate the city's schools. On top of resisting local forces of segregation and racial oppression, Black Denverites found ways to thrive in their neighborhoods. While nationally known musicians like Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald stayed at 5 Points' famed Black-owned Rosonian Hotel during the first half of the 20th century, locals flocked to hear music at other venues like the Ex-Servicemen's Club, owned by unofficial 5 Points quote-unquote mayor Benjamin Hopper. Those looking to buy homes turned to the Black American Woodman Life Insurance Company that provided mortgages to Black buyers when no other institution would, to local realtor and NAACP official W.F. Turner, or to Charles Lindburn Cousins, a self-taught Black developer and one of the richest Black men in the state. Those looking for medical care could employ the dentistry of Dr. Holmes or the skills of Dr. Westbrook, or they could look to Dr. Justina Ford, the first Black female physician in Denver. Ford set up her own private practice in 5 Points, where she treated patients of all races and classes after being discriminated against by the Colorado and American medical associations. At one point, Ford was said to have delivered 3/4 of all Black children born in the city. That's so cool. Sorry, I forgot about that part, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. The advent of racial covenants and racist mortgage lending. After the failure of the push for a segregation ordinance and a separate failed push to add segregation to the Colorado Constitution, Denver property owners associations and neighborhood improvement associations turned to covenants to restrict the Black population from moving outside of 5 Points. From the late 1920s through the 1940s, the use of covenants spread from Denver neighborhoods like Whittier, Clayton, McCulloch, Regis Heights, Bonnie Brae, and Park Hill, all the way to suburbs across the metro area. At least 82 subdivisions built in Jefferson County were covered by restrictive covenants. 2 separate Colorado Supreme Court cases upheld the validity of racially restrictive covenants before they were deemed unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1948. In Chandler v. Ziegler, the court opined that the racially restrictive covenants were neither in violation of the 14th Amendment nor an issue of public policy. In Stewart v. Cronin et al., the state then reaffirmed that covenants were not against Colorado public policy when local NAACP member and Denver lawyer George G. Ross attempted to challenge them on the same ground as the former Ziegler case. Covenants did not just affect Black Denverites, but other Denverites of color as well. In 1950, 2 years following the Supreme Court's striking down of covenants, the Japanese-American veteran named Katsuto Gao was refused veterans financing for a home on the far eastern border of Whittier because the home fell under the scope of a covenant. I can't believe I worked 8 hours a day and extra at night to save up $2,500 for a house and then have this happen, Gao told a Denver Post reporter at the time. Both the government agencies, the Veterans Administration and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, authorized the loan, and we bought our furniture. Then we found the only white persons could occupy the property. Representatives of the VA and the RFC underscored their mission to remain unbiased in home lending when interviewed by the Post, but held that they had to rescind financing for Gao's home because of and inability to secure title insurance. Insurers refused to insure the title of Gao's home due to the risk of potentially expensive lawsuits that might try to enforce the covenant. Gao was therefore left excluded from a neighborhood even when the means of his exclusion had been outlawed. Past and present discrimination made granting a mortgage to this veteran of color, quote-unquote, unsound. Gao's story underscores how discriminatory home lending, or redlining, reproduced the exclusionary effects of covenants while also devaluing neighborhoods of color. The 1937 residential security map of Denver, created by local real estate professionals for the federal government, graded 5 points a D, or its lowest rating, due to the combination of Negroes, Mexicans, and transient class of workers living there. Though the redlining map failed to mention it explicitly, 5 points was also a home to a Japanese enclave too. Whittier was acknowledged by a local appraiser as one of the quote-unquote best colored districts in the United States, but also received a D rating despite its large, well-kept brick homes. Were it not for the heavy colored population, much of it would be rated a C, the appraiser continued. Due to the effects of covenants and discriminatory mortgage lending shown by redlining maps of Denver, the white homeownership rate jumped to 54.5% in 1960 from a 1940 citywide homeownership rate of 38.4%, while for Denver's non-white population, the rate remained at just over one-third of households. Across the Denver metropolitan area, the homeownership gap was even more pronounced. Nearly two-thirds of white households owned their homes in Denver City and suburbs by 1960 versus 39% of non-white homeowners in the metro area in the 1960s. Urban renewal and its discontents. During the 1960s, Denver built the I-70 and I-25 highways that essentially cut off neighborhoods such as Globeview and in its north and west off from the rest of the city, forming an L-shaped belt of social, economic, and residential inequality beyond the asphalt borders that still persist in today's Denver. In Elyria, Swansea, the construction of the highway eliminated a vital commercial corridor and accelerated industrial development in the area, leaving behind a severed neighborhood that caused the mostly Hispanic population of children who live there today to breathe the city's most polluted air. Now, the Colorado Department of Transportation and the city are unrolling a multi-billion-dollar cap and cover plan for the highway, as well as a plan to redevelop the surrounding neighborhoods. During the late 1960s and 70s, Metropolitan State University of Denver owned its own account, receiving $12.3 million in funds to conduct urban renewal in the mostly Latinx neighborhood of Aurora, also apparently the oldest neighborhood in the city. The Aurora Urban Renewal Project, completed over a residents' protest, destroyed 330 homes and 250 businesses to make way for the Community College of Denver, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and the University of Colorado Denver. Some families received $15,000, or roughly $100,000 in today's dollars, to find other homes besides the ones they formerly occupied in a neighborhood where the median home sold for $500,000 in 2019, according to PolicyMap. Yeah, that seems about right. Around the same time, the city cleared 27 blocks of downtown for a skyline renewal project, removing the many historic buildings and displacing 1,600 mostly low-income and working-class people. For years, all that replaced them were parking lots until interest in downtown development renewed during the 1980s. Present-day Colorado. Let me just take a little sip here. In Colorado, discriminatory policies by homeowners associations have taken the torch from past property owners associations. One homeowners association in particular, the Green Valley Ranch HOA in Denver, issued 50 foreclosures, 13% of all foreclosures in Denver in 2021, while HOA foreclosures accounted for over 1/4 of all foreclosures in the city that year. These foreclosures were not for missed home payments, but for extortionate bills racked up for late fines and fees. In one case, a couple went from a $2,000 fine to a $17,000 bill that the HOA had justified their filing for foreclosure. They attributed the cost to attorney's fees. The eviction filings by HOAs also disproportionately appear to be affecting Black and Hispanic residents and residents who need and qualify for affordable housing, too. Recently, Denver intervened in the sale of 2 homes foreclosed upon by the Green Valley Ranch HOA and that were resold through the Sheriff's Department because these homes had affordability covenants designed to restrict who could purchase them. The state is also taking action to curb the ability of HOAs to foreclose upon individuals' homes for fines and fees. In early May, the state Senate passed a revised version of HB 221137, a bill that would limit HOA foreclosures to unpaid assessments rather than fines, and which would cap fees and penalties for fines in addition. For first-time home buyers, navigating the Colorado housing market this last year has been a nightmare. This is especially true for people of color who lack the familial and intergenerational wealth required to make an all-cash or high down payment $50,000 to $100,000 over asking price offer, almost required to buy homes in Denver's overheated residential market. While the people of not just Denver, but all of Colorado, with the market not just failing in Denver, but all of Colorado, it is unclear where people of color and people of low and even middle incomes excluded from or displaced by this prohibitively expensive market can go. In addition to estimating a shortage of 325,000 homes needed to balance the housing market statewide, lawmakers also estimate the state is short 15,000 affordable homes. As you can see, the story of segregation in Denver is not just a story of the past, but one of the present. And if you're interested in learning more, you can read about it here. So that's Denver for you. It has gotten... What are we defining for me? Water, well, we're just making fun of the way I say things. What did I say wrong that it means holding and stating an opinion? What was the word I didn't know? Listen, we're all here to learn. Oh, there you go. Okay. Listen, I'm here to learn. I don't know everything. I don't know most things. This stream should just be called Grace is illiterate for 60 minutes. On this week's episode of Grace being illiterate for 60 minutes with no editing to save her whatsoever. I'm waiting for it to load. I feel like, not so much Charlotte, but I feel like with Milwaukee and Denver, this may just be very, go touch grass and see the world of you, Grace. But I think Denver and Milwaukee's history of segregation, just because I'm obviously not from those places, and I'm not even from places close to those places, but those were maybe the most, like, not surprising to me, but I don't think, like, when I think of the history of racial segregation, especially as it pertains to housing, I think by default, a lot of times you think of the South, or you think of metropolitan areas kind of in the Northeast, and maybe that's just my particular knowledge. But, like, even in Milwaukee, it's interesting to see, like, they had a pretty small population of people of color, and yet here was how it played out. So I don't know, just kind of interesting. Not surprising. I don't want to say it's surprising, but it's unexpected, maybe we might say. But I digress. Let's get into Charlotte. Last one, best one. No, it's not necessarily the best. They're all important. Okay. You know that, like, I don't remember what movie that is, but it's like, they can't, like, they're like to get the straw. That's what I feel like when I use a glass straw in a plastic cup. Anyway. So from 2013 to 2019, the percentage of Charlotte zip codes that were affordable for the median Black household in terms of rent dropped below 20%. Meanwhile, corporate investors bought a quarter of all homes sold in the city during 2021, most of which were purchased in Black and brown neighborhoods. The pressures of these changes have created for Black and brown Charlotteans affect everyone in the Charlotte area, no matter their race. As corporate investors continue to buy up Charlotte's dwindling stock of naturally affordable housing, the fact that few black and brown households can afford to live in most areas of Charlotte points to how Charlotte is generally becoming unaffordable. From 2013 to 2019, regardless of race, the percentage of zip codes that were affordable for low-income renters dropped significantly, from 34% to 10%. Charlotte is increasingly becoming a place where only those with the ability to outbid these corporate investors can afford to own their own homes. With each home these investors buy, I just lost my whole place. What? With each home these investors buy, they accumulate more capital to buy up additional homes in other low and moderate income neighborhoods. Given how housing affordability has played a major factor in Charlotte's growth up until this point, such a shift places the viability of the city's future growth into question. The cost of segregation and housing inequality in Charlotte must be redressed to ensure that all Charlotteans reap the benefits of growth instead of experiencing diminishing affordability and displacement. To begin that point of redress, the story map will track how we got to this point. It begins by taking us all the way back to see how Jim Crow's development shaped neighborhoods that emerged in the early 20th century Charlotte, and tracks how segregation forged the city's landscape and its banking system from then to now. Let's get into it. Early development in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the beginnings of segregation. I just need to readjust because, oh my god, my back is like not having it. Am I still moderately in frame? Sure. Okay, cool. Okay. This feels like, I feel like this is such a weird position, but I'm just going to lean with it and rock with it. During the late 19th century, urban developers in Charlotte, such as Edward Latta, founder of the Charlotte Consolidated Construction Company, built small, separate black and white developments located close to one another. Occasionally, black enclaves included finer homes, like those found on back streets that Latta built on the northern border of his initial developments, or like those found in the black, quote-unquote, streetcar suburb of Washington Heights. But by the early 20th century, fueled by racist reactions to Reconstruction and its failures, black dwelling areas in Charlotte were even further removed from white dwelling areas and were dominated by the construction of lower grade shotgun houses. It was this type of home. The picture, oh, I think this is supposed to be a picture of it. The shotgun homes. It was this type of home clustered in the city's second ward that housed the residential base of the city's early 20th century black cultural and commercial hub, Brooklyn. Rose Leary Love, in her memoir Plum Thickets and Field Daisies, recalled Brooklyn as a place, quote-unquote, where ordinary citizens lived, where doctors and ministers and laborers resided among each other while farming the nearby hills, and where the custom of helping one another was once a very strong factor in community life. The move to Brooklyn represented a complicated mixture of... Wait, did I miss something? Is there something missing here? No, okay. The move to Brooklyn represented a complicated mixture of coercion, celebratory community forming, and hard-won concessions. The black Charlotteans were banned from the ballot box in many cases, and due to Jim Crow restrictions, their businesses were either removed or severely curtailed from locations downtown. Still, they successfully lobbied the city to create the first black high school, Second Ward High School, and its first library for black patrons, Brevard Street Library in Brooklyn. These efforts provided the city's African American community with the institutional scaffolding necessary to face growing racism, racial oppression through future activism, advancement, and organization. They also complemented the new black commercial district in Brooklyn that included the first black-built and black-occupied office building in Charlotte. The Lambert Mecklenburg Investment Company building, this still stands on South Brevard Street. Both those institutions and that commercial clout would serve as crucial resources for blunting segregation's advance in Charlotte over the decades to come. Sorry, I'm just like getting warm. Hello? Zipper ASMR, sorry, you had to hear that. The advent of racial covenants and racist mortgage lending. Racial covenants started appearing in Charlotte around the early 1900s through the Piedmont Realty Company, a Charlotte real estate development group founded by George Steffens, Walter Brem, F.C. Abbott, and B.D. Heath. The Piedmont Realty Company built neighborhoods like Myers Park and Elizabeth, which still exist today. And it was North Carolina. I was right. You know what? Okay. You know what? It's fine. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, Grace. The Piedmont Realty Fund, the mortgages for its racially restrictive homes. See, I never should have doubted myself. The mortgages for its racially restricted homes through the American Trust Company, created by many of the same founders. American Trust later became North Carolina National Bank, which later became Nations Bank and then merged into the Charlotte-hosted Bank of America. By the 1910s, racially restrictive covenants started appearing in Charlotte's working and middle-class neighborhoods, built on the fringes of the downtown core, such as Plaza Midwood, Belmont, Optimist Park, and Villa Heights. De jure segregation, the federal government backs racist housing. By the 1930s, the Federal Housing Administration's mortgage underwriting standards favored racially homogenous neighborhoods protected by restrictive covenants. It effectively turned those privately racialized boundaries into a prominent feature of Charlotte's landscape by restricting access to home financing by race and neighborhood composition. This process was called redlining. As a 2017 report from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte's Urban Institute on Redlining in the City reads, quote, areas once deemed too risky for investment because of racially driven policy still have the lowest home ownership rates in 2017, end quote. Formerly redlined neighborhoods like the historic West End have some of the city's lowest measures of air quality and remain among the city's most segregated, only outpaced by the high levels of segregation characteristic of wealthy white areas such as the formerly A-graded neighborhoods of Myers Park and Dilworth. Dilworth is kind of a funny name. I'm not trying to make light of this. It came to me. Of course, homes built for and occupied by black residents in Charlotte were almost overwhelmingly of lesser quality than white homes, but the motivations for redlining were less objective than the FHA's reliance on local real estate officials' often racist judgments of lending risk. On the northern tip of Myers Park, the historically black neighborhood of Cherry is an example of these biased judgments. According to notes that accompanied the 1937's residential security map, its redlining map, housing in Cherry consisted of, quote, fair cottages in good repair, and the neighborhood was rich in commercial activity, churches, and schools. And it was located in one of Charlotte's premier residential enclaves. Cherry residents spent their days doing domestic work to no adverse effect on Myers Park's A grading by officials. But its sole and most important quote-unquote detrimental influence, according to local loan service representative C.W. Nixon, is its entirely Negro population. It received a D rating from the examiner's office. It's just so crazy that you read about, like, they give this whole nice description of a neighborhood and then they're like, but there's black people there, so it's horrible. And it's just like, it's baffling to read it, just to read it like that. Anyway, the local impact of such discriminatory mortgage lending practices that expanded with FHA support from the late 1930s onward was stark. While in Charlotte, less than one-third of all residents, 27.5%, owned their homes in 1940, by 1960, nearly two-thirds of all white households, 63%, owned their homes compared to less than one-quarter of black households in Charlotte. You can see this little graph down here. It's kind of hard to see, but I feel like if I zoom in, my computer is going to overheat and die. So forgive. So you can go look on the website. Urban renewal and the destruction of black neighborhoods in Charlotte. With the newfound homeownership gap also came the destruction of Brooklyn. Charlotte lending realtors and home builders manned a slum clearance committee for the city as early as 1948, and their push for housing code enforcement precipitated the city's decision to clear swaths of the city of blight through urban renewal and freeway renewal. Ironically, this blight had been created by many of those same industry leaders through their racially discriminating practices. During the late 1940s, the construction of Independence Boulevard cut a gash through Brooklyn while accelerated building neglect by white property owners, whose negligence had already been incentivized by the city's 1947 rezoning of Brooklyn from residential to industrial use. After a city commission set out in 1958 to study the extent of blight in the neighborhood, Brooklyn was declared slated for demolition in 1960. Between then and the mid-1970s, the Brooklyn Renewal Project displaced 1,009 families, all of whom were black. The project did so without providing any relocation resources, effectively wiping Charlotte's most important black neighborhood from the face of the city and uprooting its families at the cost of millions to the public. Brooklyn was just one place. In total, the city tore down 11,000 houses between 1963 and 1975, a majority of which were located in black neighborhoods. The construction of the Brookshire Freeway, I-277, during the 1960s further sliced up historic West Side black neighborhoods, such as Washington Heights and McCrory Heights, where some of those displaced families would move. Others, meanwhile, would either purchase homes in formerly all-white mill neighborhoods on the downtown fringes from blockbusters like Mayor Stan Brookshire's brother, or rent homes from white-owned, low-income housing projects like Brook Hill Village and Double Oaks that had been subsidized through cheap land leases from a city and forgivable low-cost Section 608 FHA loans. Present-day Charlotte, self-reinforcing effects. When Charlotte embarked on building its new light rail transit system during the 2000s, it failed to follow up on an intended goal of ensuring that affordable housing would be built along its transit lines. Of 6,200 new housing units built along the city's first blue line through 2019, only 100 of them were below market units, which is less than 2%. The result is what could have been a potential avenue to racial equity in the city has instead turned into a tool for continued inequality and displacement. While the city of Charlotte actually saw a decrease in its white population from 2010 to 2020, adjacent tracts to its original blue line saw a 61% increase of white residents and a 6% decrease in black residents. Even as Charlotte's rents become increasingly unaffordable and home prices continue to climb, black and Hispanic loan applicants in Mecklenburg County were denied mortgage loans at double the rate of whites. This continues to push a number of home-seeking residents of color further and further away from the ability to secure places in the city. In addition, corporate landlords, again, are buying up the city's dwindling mid- and lower-priced housing stock in order to transform it into rentals, placing all cash above-market offers on homes that would outbid many moderate-income black and Hispanic residents. One analysis found that more than 25,000 single-family homes in Mecklenburg County are owned by Wall Street-backed interests, with a disproportionate number of those homes located in historically black neighborhoods such as Pottstown. So I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, so I do want to be cognizant of that. And I have just thrown a lot of information at you, and I apologize. So what I want to say about all of this is that I think you've kind of seen this continual theme throughout all three of these places about corporate landlords, which I think is a hugely under-talked about phenomena that's going on in the housing justice space. We do actually have an entire policy brief on our website also about corporate landlords, so if you'd like to read more about that, you can. I would like to get into it too in one of these episodes, but it is very complicated and I don't feel fully equipped yet to handle it, but I would like to. So with that being said, that's kind of all I have for you this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're joining me live, which I have live people today, thank you for joining me live. And if you're watching after the fact, thank you for watching anyway. As I said in the beginning, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer here at the Redress Movement. You can follow us here on our social medias. If you're interested in getting involved in the work that we do, you can email us at hello@redressmovement.org to be connected. If you're in one of those three cities, we'd love to get you to know one of our field organizers. If you're not one of those three cities, that's totally fine. You'll be working with a digital organizer like myself. This is the Recon. I do this every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I would love for you to come back. I would love for you to be here. And that's really all I have. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, everybody.